Sure, I haven't done a video on here before, but I have gotten emails from some of the people I'm subscribed to when they've had live streams, and I decided to try to do one here. Oh, it took a while before it registered that I was in. um, a couple weeks ago, I just landed a job paying almost twice what I have ever made in a year before. I just got my first paycheck last week, and I decided to buy a professional microphone, and I hope this sounds better than my usual content when I usually speak into my um webcam, but I can't really hear it myself. I think I am going to I wanna save this as a YouTube video afterward also, and I don't know how to, check the settings for that, but, um, I'm going to read the top 50. Okay, it shows up on my Substack. Oh, okay, the audio is coming in, um, pretty solid. Now, I need to figure out how to not lose this when I convert it to YouTube. Um, I'm going to look that up right now before I start. All right, connecting your account in settings. So I probably should have done that first. Um, okay, I just added it to connect to my YouTube account. I don't know if that is automatically going to connect here. I'm also going to um, try to connect this onto my LinkedIn, and I'm going to see how that works. I'm going to see if it's showing up now that I'm streaming. It does not look like it is. All right, so maybe I will have to re-record this for YouTube at a later date, but I am going to I mean, the only person here is Joseph Edwards, who has already read it, so Um, anyway, here is my top 50. I am probably going to, well, I should cut some of it when I really get in the weeds. Um, Number 1, Alex Palou. Last year, meaning 2024, 27th. Boy, do I have egg on my face. After year upon year of me declaring Palou overrated, he finally wore me down and delivered one of the best IndyCar seasons of my lifetime. I'm not going to say I was wrong to call him overrated in previous years. I do think to an extent he was inflated by Ganassi clearly having the best cars over the entire season's schedule, especially on natural road courses over the last half decade, and I still think Joseph Newgarden was better than him in 2021 and Colton Herta was in 2024, although I did quietly retrospectively elevate the E minus I gave Palou in 2024 to E this year. Even at the start of the year, when Scott McLaughlin won the pole at St. Pete and Palou won entirely due to pit strategy, I was like, here we go again. However, there really was nothing to criticize after that. What stood out especially was Palou's advantage over Scott Dixon, which was never this pronounced before. While Dixon still finished third in points and won a race, so people erroneously think he had a very good season. Maybe that was slightly too harsh. The speed differential between them was immense. Palou beat Dixon in speed percentile by a margin of 92.50 to 66.45, 26.05 percentage points, a far larger margin than in any of his other title years. In his previous title seasons, Palou beat Dixon by 5.69 points, 11.47, and 2.22 in speed percentile. None of those other seasons even come close, and you could really see it on track, too. At Thermal, he won by 10 seconds, even though Pato O'Ward dominated the race and beat Dixon by 54 seconds. At Barber, Palou won by 16 seconds and beat Dixon by 58. Even when Dixon upset Palou at Mid-Ohio after Palou made an uncharacteristic error and went off track, it's worth noting that Palou had built enough of a lead to beat him out of the pits before that happened, despite having one fewer pit stop. His speed percentile this year is the greatest ever recorded in IndyCar, as are his 8 fastest races, but I have no speed data prior to 2013. Furthermore, although it honestly seemed like he should have won more than 8 times, he did become the first driver ever to do so in IRL IndyCar history. The previous record was 6, and the first to do so against an unsplit field since Al Unser Jr. in 1994. For half the year, he and Kyle Kirkwood were the only drivers to even win. Palou led all statistics I track except lead change record, although his 8 lead changes were twice as many as any other driver this season, and teammate rating. Will Power barely pipped Palou in teammate rating, but I think that was more because Scott McLaughlin and Newgarden underachieved than because Power overachieved. Although Palou has never led my teammate model in a season, I think one of the things that hurts him is that one of his teammates is Kippen Simpson, who is so bad that even sweeping him doesn't earn you as much as dominating a top tier driver. If you only considered his record against Dixon, he would easily be in first place. He did overtake O'Ward to be the highest rated IndyCar driver in my teammate model this year. Additionally, his 6TNL 5.89 lead shares and 5.62 CRL all rank second all time in IndyCar, meaning IRL only, history. Palou finally resolved my last remaining criticisms of him by finally winning on an oval twice, including his Indy 500 win, which wasn't particularly one of his best performances, but he still was as deserving as anyone else, and making far more on track passes for the lead than anyone else, after I mostly left him out of my top 25 because he only had one last year. Does this mean if Palou ever gets an F1 ride, which he never does the fact that I ranked Palou over any F1 drivers mean that if Palou ever gets an F1 ride, which he never will, that I think he'd win the title there? No. It's not easy for anyone to learn new cars and tracks, particularly in their mid-career. But I do think his dominance over the rest of the IndyCar field trumps what anyone did in F1, where the top drivers were a lot more even. I understand why somebody might disagree since the Ganassi cars were so dominant that Dixon still finished third in points, even though he had kind of a bad season. However, I find this season analogous to any of Max Verstappen's seasons when Sergio Perez was his teammate, and there's no getting around the fact that the Indy 500 is probably more important than the IndyCar title too. Palou winning the title and the 500 and breaking quite a few of the single season IRL/IndyCar records, including the win record in a year when he easily could have won 10 times, clearly puts him on top of the heap. Number 2, Max Verstappen, last year number 1. It goes without saying that Verstappen was once again the best F1 driver this season, but even though I rated him number 1 globally in each year from 2021 to 2024, I have decided to rate Alex Palou over him this year. Is Verstappen still the best driver in the world? Sure. But I think I marginally like Palou's 2025 season better. I toyed with ranking Verstappen first anyway, and I certainly won't argue with you if you do. While both Palou and Verstappen won 8 races, Palou did so with the overwhelmingly fastest car, a car so fast that it dragged a borderline washed-up Scott Dixon to third in points, and the decent but not great Ganassi satellite drivers Felix Rosenqvist and Marcus Armstrong into the top 10. Verstappen, by contrast, only lost the F1 title by 2 points, even though Yuki Tsunoda, who I previously felt was one of the most underrated F1 drivers, finished an abysmal 17th in the championship. The question comes down to whether you think Palou's dominance over Dixon or Verstappen's dominance over Tsunoda was a more impressive feat. Usually, I primarily judge teammate gaps based on differences in speed percentile. Verstappen ranked third in speed percentile in F1 at 87.52, behind both McLaren drivers, while Tsunoda's speed percentile was a miserable 13th at 35.81. Although I realize Tsunoda also had 2 races for Red Bull's satellite V-carb operation, so maybe I should throw those out. Palou beat Dixon by 26 percentage points, and one can certainly make the case that beating a 6-time champion by 26 points in speed is better than beating a career winless driver by 52. And I suspect the Ganassi cars are more equal than the Red Bull cars are too. In my open wheel model, Verstappen ranked third globally this year at .490 behind Charles Leclerc's .666 and Nick Cassidy's .550. While I'm certainly not going to say either of them was better. He tended to rate better in earlier years because he was sweeping Sergio Perez, who was a lot better than Tsunoda. Palou, by contrast, ranked ninth at 8.378, but just like how Verstappen was weighed down because his teammate was Tsunoda, Palou was significantly weighed down because his other teammate was Kevin Simpson, who was so low rated that even Palou sweeping Simpson, which he didn't quite do, would have caused him to fall behind Verstappen. I think ultimately, when evaluating my model, I have to consider whether Verstappen's rating against Lawson and Tsunoda, .490, is better or worse than Palou's rating against Dixon. Palou's rating just against Dixon is .533, and obviously he won the title, dominated the season, won the Indy 500, and showed more versatility because he won on ovals as well. While Verstappen still overachieved but never led the title chase this season. Now, to be fair to Verstappen, all right, I mentioned that later. I think the final factor that makes me go for Palou is just a knee-jerk bias against all the other list makers who always rank the highest ranked F1 driver first, regardless of anything anyone else does in any other series. There were a lot of years historically when I have not rated F1 drivers first, even though I have on all my previously published top 100/top 200 lists. And it felt time for another one when nobody stood out in F1 to quite the same extent as Verstappen has previously. But I totally get the other argument, and I never say anyone ranking Verstappen first is wrong, especially because he did other impressive things, like winning on his NLS debut with Chris Lullum. Autosport ranking George Russell over Palou was clearly wrong, though. Despite having a slower car than the McLarens, Verstappen still led F1 in numerous statistical categories, including natural races led, wins, races with the most lead shares, CRL, races with the most laps led, and poles. In every single one of these categories, he had 8 of each. If Verstappen had not been penalized for roughing up Russell at Barcelona, and if he'd won the title with the third fastest car, I would rank him in first place, but he didn't, so I won't. Number 3, Brock Feeney, last year number 37. Feeney, Fee-hee-hee-hee-heeny, Feeney. Okay, granted, the Feeney call perfectly epitomized the moment when Boy Meets World went downhill, but I digress. I pretty much called it last year when I wrote this. However, I also think Will Brown only won the title this year just because he was more experienced. This reminds me a lot of Bobby Labonte winning the 2000 NASCAR Cup Series title because he was more experienced and therefore consistent than Tony Stewart before Stewart outperformed him in every future season. I expect the same thing to happen here, and I think from this point on, Feeney is going to overtake Brown to become the perennial Supercars championship favorite, unless Chaz Mostert finally gets the championship caliber ride he deserves. Since it seemed for most of the year that Walkinshaw and Andretti United did not have the speed of the perennial frontrunners, Triple Eight Race Engineering, Feeney should have, by all rights, run away with the Supercars championship this year. I had a feeling, even based on last year's performances, that Feeney was going to utterly dominate Brown this year based on the trajectory of his ascent by age, which was a lot faster than Brown's in previous seasons. Even in the Brown entry I wrote, Feeney over the next half decade, I suspect, is going to make this whole Brody Kostecki slash Will Brown era look really silly in retrospect. Like Alex Palou in IndyCar, but arguably to an even greater extent, Feeney led every single category in supercars except for lead change record and my teammate model. In most categories, no one was even close to him. He led all drivers with 14 natural races led, wins, TNL, races with the most lead shares, 13.67 lead shares, 13.15 CRL, 16 races with the most laps led, 19 poles, 8 fastest laps, 13 fastest races, and an 87.37 speed percentile. In all the data based on counting or cumulative performance except for fastest laps, he doubled or even more than tripled the counts of all other drivers. But he didn't win the title. Just like how NASCAR ripped off supercars in developing its new chassis, supercars ripped off NASCAR in introducing a knockout playoff format that nobody really wanted. Admittedly, the supercars final at Adelaide was based on a 3-race cumulative points score, which is a little better than NASCAR's 1-race final, which I know they just got rid of. But Feeney lost the championship to Chaz Mostert in the final race after Feeney was wrecked by Mostert's teammate Ryan Wood for second place in the opening lap of the finale. I don't really think it was team tactics since Wood had wildly overdriven all season, but nonetheless, it might just be the biggest injustice in auto racing playoffs history. NASCAR has had deserving drivers lose playoff era championships before, but none I think had a season quite this strong. While I expected Feeney to dominate Brown, I didn't expect it to be this dark. Brown was still although Feeney demolished Brown in almost all categories, Brown was still somewhat close in speed with 5 fastest laps and the second fastest speed percentile of 80.04. So that means the Triple Eight cars remain the fastest, but I think Feeney's advantage over the rest of the field as a driver was greater than his car advantage. Feeney also won the GT Australia title with 4 wins in that series, giving him 18 wins overall in 2025. For a lot of the year, I was actually going to take him first overall over both Palou and Verstappen, but I've decided to take him third. Part of it is that he did nowhere near as well in my touring car model as those two did in my open wheel model, because Brown is still rated as a below average driver in my touring car model, albeit only barely at this point. While Scott Dixon is obviously well above average, and Yuki Tsunoda was above average until he again fell below average this season when Verstappen swept him. The other part is that while all 3 drivers significantly dominated their teammates, I think Palou and Verstappen dominated their teammates by more. I realize Brown is the defending Supercars champion, but I am more impressed by Palou beating Scott Dixon by 26 percentage points than Feeney beating Brown by 7, and I'm particularly more impressed by Verstappen beating Tsunoda by 52 percentage points. I might have still rated Feeney first anyway if he'd won the Supercars title as well, which he deserved to do. And I think Feeney, Palou, and Verstappen are all really close, but though these are the reasons I landed on third instead of second or first. Number 4, Sebastian Ogier. I have never heard his name pronounced because I haven't really watched much rally stuff because it is difficult to watch. I'm sure I butchered it. Last year, number 58. Most people probably expected when I'm going to guess Ogier. When Ogier dropped back to part-time status after his 8th title in 9 years, he would never win another title again, much like his similarly named predecessor, Sebastian Loeb. But Ogier had other ideas, as he unexpectedly won his record-tying 9th title despite skipping 3 races. I feel bad only ranking him in 4th place, but I couldn't really justify taking it over Brock Feeney's 18-win season, Max Verstappen continuing to be generally the best driver in the world, or Alex Palou having the best IndyCar season of the 21st century. Nonetheless, I think Ogier's year was probably better for his overall legacy than if he'd had a number 1 season in his power run. While I still think Loeb is better, mainly because I think his competition was better, and I imagine he'll still be higher on my 1,000 greatest drivers list because I have given him multiple number 1 seasons while I've never given Ogier one, not to mention that Loeb has some major accomplishments outside rally cars, while Ogier really doesn't. The fact that Ogier has now bounced back to win a title, even as a part-timer, 12 years after his first title, makes a strong GOAT case for him. He now arguably has more longevity than Loeb, and now that he has 10 Monte Carlo rally wins to Loeb's 8, it seems likely that he'll probably continue to have the most wins in that rally for the rest of his life. But the part-time championship is what was really sick. For much of the year, it looked like Ogier's Toyota teammate Elfyn Evans, after 4 previous second-place finishes, would finally get his long-awaited WRC title. But Ogier's 6 wins, including 3 in the last 5 rallies, allowed Ogier to overtake Evans by a mere 4 points. Obviously, they weren't even close, especially when considering that the only 2 rallies that Evans won came in rallies Ogier didn't start. Perhaps more surprisingly, their other teammate, Kalle Rovanperä, finished third behind both of them after winning back-to-back titles in 2022 and 2023, even though he was barely in his early 20s and should likely be doing better now. However, it's worth noting that Rovanperä never actually overtook Ogier, as he did not win his titles until Ogier dropped back to part-time, so maybe he was never better to begin with. That's part of the reason why I never gave Ogier a number 1 season either, because I remain unconvinced that he ever would have overtaken Loeb if Loeb hadn't dropped back to part-time. However, at this point, it does seem like there's a much better argument that Ogier would have overtaken Loeb than Rovanperä will overtake Ogier. I suspect at this point Rovanperä knows that, and that may be why he's making his weird pivot to Super Formula, much like how Fernando Alonso knew he would never challenge Lewis Hamilton in wins and championships, so he tried to make his case as a better driver historically by crossing over into other marquee racing events. I suspect Rovanperä's departure is his attempt to do a similar thing. Although I guess it's unclear whether Ogier will ever run full-time again, Rovanperä leaving the series makes it even more likely that Ogier will repeat, since he has even less competition, even if he still remains a part-time driver. I've got to watch more rally footage just to pronounce the names right. I don't know where I'm going to stop here, especially because the only people watching this are people who are already paid subscribers who have already seen this. But number 5, Oliver Rowland, last year, 79. Although I imagine this might not age well, I genuinely think Rowland was the best British open-wheel driver this year, even over Lando Norris or George Russell. The motorsports intelligentsia generally insists that the F1 champion should always be the highest-rated driver every year. In the Max Verstappen dynasty run, I agreed, but this year Norris spent most of the season playing second fiddle to his less experienced McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri, who only very recently crept above average in my open wheel model. I still kind of think Pato O'Ward is the best McLaren driver over both of them. Meanwhile, Rowland clinched the Formula E title 2 races early in a much more competitive series, amongst the teams at any rate, even if the average driver quality is worse, while his teammate Norman Nato finished 20th in points. Yes, Nato missed 2 races and was stripped of a win on track, but aside from that race, he was basically uncompetitive, while Rowland dominated even more than it looked like. Rowland was the first driver since I started my full season statistical tables, which admittedly only go back 3 years for this series, I think, to have 10 natural races led in a season, and his 4.86 lead shares and 3.64 CRL are records too, even though many Formula E races continue to be restrictor plate-esque free-for-alls, where most of the drivers are posting nearly identical speeds for the entire race. In addition to winning the title, Rowland led most statistical categories outright, including lead change record 19 and 12, 19 lead changes is a hell of a lot for any open wheel series. I mean, which just belies the crapshoot nature of Formula E. So for somebody to dominate that much when it's like an all restrictor plate kind of season is amazing. Um, TNL 5, races with the most lead shares 8, races with the most laps led 5, and he tied runner-up Nick Cassidy with 4 wins and third place points finisher Pascal Wehrlein with 3 poles. However, I do think Cassidy was very close to Roland, and I actually think the gap between their seasons is closer than the standings made it look. Cassidy had a massive speed advantage over everyone else. With 5 fastest laps, Roland had 0, 7 fastest races, Roland again shockingly had 0, and a speed percentile of 75.87, a whopping 12.78 percentage points higher than Roland's second place 63.09. Cassidy also led all Formula E drivers in my teammate model at .483, while Roland only ranked 8th. So the question came down to whether I was more impressed by Roland's advantage in passing or Cassidy's advantage in speed and performance against his teammate. Roland admittedly did beat Nato in points by a much bigger margin, 184 to 21, than Cassidy beat Mitch Evans, 153 to 74. But admittedly, Evans is tied for the all-time Formula E win lead with Sebastian Buemi, while Nato has only won once, and Evans was the Formula E leader in my open wheel model during every single update until this year. Ultimately, I chose Roland over Cassidy not merely because he won the title, but because I believe the driver is a bigger factor in terms of on track passes for the lead, while speed advantages have much more to do with the car. Roland was a far better duelist than Cassidy, as his 19 and 12 lead change record far outstrips Cassidy's 3 and 2 in raw passing ability. Cassidy was not much less dominant, but he didn't have to fight for the lead as much because he was the only driver to lead a race flag to flag, which he did twice, while Roland had to pass and repass and re-repass all season, which impresses me more. Number 6, Kelvin van der Linde, 25th last year, although I believe I ended up bumping him down to the E- tier to make room for Palou retrospectively. The sports car driver of the year, van der Linde, not only won the 24 Hours of Nürburgring with Augusto Farfus, Jesse Krohn, and Raffaele Marciello, and the Bathurst 12 Hour with Farfus and his brother Sheldon, but he also won multiple major league titles this year. Both the Nürburgring and Bathurst endurance races counted toward the Intercontinental GT title, and van der Linde won 2 of the other 3 races in that series as well at Suzuka and Indianapolis. Although the BMWs dominated in that series in general, they tended to rotate their driving lineup, so van der Linde had slightly different teammates with each race, but he was always the team linchpin. Not only that, but he also won the GT World Challenge Europe Sprint Cup Championship with Charles Weerts, who also shared in his Suzuka and Indianapolis wins, as well as the GT World Challenge Endurance Cup season opener, which was also shared with Hugo de Wilde. When considering he won multiple major league championships and multiple overall marquee endurance race wins in the same season with a rotating set of teammates, he was clearly the best sports car driver of the year. I don't care that I've been unable to find either lap time or lap leader data to more closely distinguish between these drivers for Intercontinental GT or the SRO championships. I think I'm going to stop at 25. And then I'm going to see if this automatically transfers to YouTube like I was hoping that it would. I don't think it's going to, and then I might have to reread this on my channel at some point. I'll obviously want to notify them that I have a microphone because I stopped uploading things until I bought this mic. All right. Number 7, Tom Ingram, last year 26th. I rated Ingram as the best touring car driver of the year, mainly because he was the only driver in any of the series I tracked who led his series in every statistical category. 8 natural races led, 7 and 4 lead change record, 7 wins, 7 TNL, 6.67 lead shares, 7 races with the most lead shares, 6.53 CRL, 7 races with the most laps led, 2 poles, tied with Dan Camish and Daryl DeLeon, 9 fastest laps, 7 fastest races, 86.59 speed percentile, 0.339 rating. He led in every single category. Nobody else did that in any other series, and I tracked a lot of Major League Series. Wow, that doesn't happen often. While Dan Camish and Daryl DeLon tied it with the most polls, Ingram led every other statistical category outright, usually by a solid margin over four-time champion Ashley Sutton. It does seem that, as with Sutton, one of his big advantages was that his cars seemed a little faster. While Ingram improved from second in points to win the title. His teammate and fellow Tom, Chilton, Max's brother, also improved from 10th to 7th in points and doubled his win total. While with Chilton actually winning a race on speed and not only a reverse grid race as he did last year. In spite of that, though, Ingram's rating also improved from 0.241 to 0.339, a far greater increase than Sutton's more marginal increase in driver rating. So it's easy to argue that Ingram elevated his performance to an even greater extent than his team did based on that. This is Ingram's highest rated season in my model in his career, even over his championship winning 2022, and his 7 wins are his most ever as well. I never really considered him for my top 5 because I don't think I can rate this as highly as Sutton's 2023, which I rated second because he tied Alain Menu's record for the most all time wins in a season with 12, but this is definitely pretty close. Number 8, Charles Leclerc, last year ninth. I admit I was initially planning to more closely follow the F1 point standings and rank Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri second and third in F1, but after I saw the Autosport list ranking both George Russell and Leclerc higher, I began to reconsider. Norris and Piastri were very evenly matched, and neither of them did very well in my model, while Leclerc and Russell both decimated their teammates. I went with Leclerc over Russell, even though Russell won twice and Leclerc did not, because I think it's a lot more impressive to dominate a 7 time champion in Lewis Hamilton, even though he is in decline and doesn't seem that interested in expending great efforts to overachieve in a slow car at this stage of his career than it is to dominate a rookie like Russell did. My model entirely bears this out, as Leclerc led my open wheel model globally this year with the diabolical rating of 0.666 because it judges dominating Hamilton to be a more significant accomplishment than Max Verstappen dominating Yuki Tsunoda. I don't think his season was better than Verstappen's, but I do think it was marginally better than the other three, all of whom I feel are close. Leclerc's rating of 0.666, Russell's 0.408, Norris's 0.096, and Piastri's 0.063 are so far apart that this creates a pretty obvious hierarchy in my mind, and I've decided to follow my model's rankings accordingly, as the gaps between Leclerc, Russell, and Norris are far too large for me to decide not to. I could have rated Piastri over Norris since his overall season numbers look better, his advanced numbers that I calculated, but here I decided to tip it in favor of the actual champion. I rate according to what each driver did, given the context of their own car, so I care less about how many wins a driver has, especially in cars that weren't very capable of winning. Some people are belittling Leclerc's season a little because Hamilton did win the sprint race at Shanghai, while Leclerc won no races this year, but the gap between them was simply too large for me not to put Leclerc second in F1. No driver has come even close to beating Hamilton 18-3 in a season like Leclerc did this year, and that was enough to propel Leclerc above Hamilton in my model overall as well. Leclerc's head-to-head comparisons against Hamilton were very similar to Russell's comparisons against Kimi Antonelli. But when you consider Hamilton's vast experience and 7 titles versus Antonelli starting the year as a wet behind the ears 18-year-old, this becomes, in my opinion, pretty obvious. He didn't have the second best season because Ferrari wasn't capable of it this year, but he was the second best driver. No teammate has ever made Lewis Hamilton look worse. Number 9, George Russell, last year 5th. Autosport ranking Russell over Palou and even Oliver Rowland was ridiculous, but ranking him over Lando Norris was not. Even though Russell's teammate Kimi Antonelli was a rookie, Antonelli was fast enough that I do think Russell beating him by over a 2-1 margin in points was more impressive than Norris kind of backing into the title after his teammate Oscar Piastri had outperformed him most of the season and still finished the year with better advanced stats. Like Max Verstappen, but to a lesser extent, Russell stood out by winning multiple races for Mercedes in a year when the McLarens were overwhelmingly dominant. Granted, Russell had access to the same Mercedes-AMG F1 M16 engine that the McLaren drivers were using, which is one of the reasons I ended up rating Leclerc higher, because not only did he beat a better driver by a larger margin, his Ferrari engines were a lot slower than the Mercedes, and all drivers who have rookie teammates will be inflated in my model as it stands. Perhaps if I ever add some sort of age curve, or better yet, an experience curve to adjust my model, I can fix this. I mean, I know F1 metrics did that. I'm not sure I know enough to know how to do that. I mean, the F1 metrics guy was a much better mathematician than I was able to get a PhD. I just had a 1-year master's degree, and a lot of the stuff I did in my college statistics classes is nothing I ever used in the real world, like ANOVA testing, comparing the differences between two means and stuff. A lot of that stuff I barely even remember that I was doing in my 1 year of grad school almost 20 years ago, and it obviously had no bearing on any of the auto racing analytics work I did later. So I'm not sure I have the skills to model an age curve for my current model as it stands, but I probably should try at some point. I think I want to finish my rally driver's model first before I try some sort of age curve, and then I might adjust all of them that way. Um, Nonetheless, I don't think the large difference between Russell's rating of 0.408 and Norris's rating of 0.096 can be reduced to having an inexperienced teammate alone. Piastri himself is only in his third year, although there's certainly a big difference between Piastri being a 24-year-old and Antonelli being a 19-year-old. When considering the fact that Russell still had the same engine as Norris and Piastri and did have the advantage of a less experienced teammate, I'm not going to say he was much better than Norris and Piastri, who obviously put up substantially better numbers because they had the fastest car. But I think I give him the edge because he was consistently strong and was the unambiguous team leader throughout the year, while Norris spent most of the year playing second fiddle to Piastri before Piastri inexplicably tanked. Really, I think the differences between Leclerc, Russell, Norris, and Piastri were not very massive, and you could get away with ranking them in any order. Just all of them have to be behind Verstappen, obviously. Number 10, Nick Cassidy, last year 18th. Although Cassidy came up short in the championship, and I ultimately decided the champion Oliver Rowland was a little better, Cassidy has become arguably the most reliably consistent driver in a series where seemingly no one can maintain consistency from year to year or even from race to race in the Tour de France peloton-esque Formula E races, with somewhat artificial nonstop passing induced via drivers intentionally letting each other pass to save energy, or the utilization of attack mode where drivers drive outside the racing groove and usually lose positions to obtain boost to repass other drivers. I mean, it's probably like the most gimmicky series in the world, but um at least when they created their artificial excitement, they really created artificial excitement, while a lot of NASCAR and IndyCar's attempts to do the same fell flat on their face. Um, this essentially equalizes the field in speed, and it helps that unlike other series like IndyCar or Super Formula, there are essentially no ride buyers here. Yet you can very reasonably make a case that Cassidy was the best Formula E driver in any of the last 3 seasons. I haven't rated him as the best driver yet, but I wouldn't criticize you if you did. And it's worth noting that even though Cassidy is probably not very well known to anyone in American racing circles, at this point. He did beat Alex Palou for the Super Formula title in 2019, and he was also the highest rated Super Formula driver in my model in both 2018 and 2019 before he even started in Formula E. That that didn't mean a lot when people thought Palou was just going to be some IndyCar bust or mid-packer or something. I mean, I know when Polo started, I thought he was gonna be like Marcus Armstrong or something, an okay mid-packer who might back into a win someday. I had no idea he was going to win the title in his second season. I did not see that one coming at all. I mean, I already had my open wheel model then. I introduced it, I think during Pelot's first season. He had a below average rating at the time, so that came out the hell out of nowhere. It is worth noting that I think Palou would have won the title if he had not had a mechanical failure in the last race of that season, and he was a rookie, and he did have the most poles and fastest laps. I'm not gonna say Cassidy is better than Palou, obviously, but Cassidy beating Palou for that title is nonetheless a much bigger deal now than it was then. After 5 finishes outside the top 10 in his first 6 starts while Roland posted 3 wins, Cassidy was never in legitimate title contention, but 4 wins in the last 6 races allowed him to massively skyrocket from 13th to 2nd in points by season's end. Cassidy was the overwhelmingly fastest driver this year with 5 fastest laps, nobody else had more than 3, 7 fastest races, nobody else had more than 2, 4 wins tied with Roland for the most, and a speed percentile of 75.87, utterly destroying Roland's 63.09. Moreover, Cassidy's hot streak put an exclamation point on a season where he clearly and overwhelmingly took over Jaguar team leader status from his teammate Mitch Evans when they were evenly matched before. Evans had been the highest rated FB driver for the entire history of my open wheel model since I launched it in 2021, and he tied Sebastian Buemi for the most all time wins this year, but he was also starting to look washed up. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, now this season, Evans and Cassidy are almost tied for like fifth in points. Whatever. Maybe it was just a weird off year like Earnhardt's 1992. Um, although some of Evans's numbers weren't uh Although some of Evans's numbers weren't too bad, especially his 1.34 lead shares and 1.67 CRL, Cassidy's numbers, even in those categories, were better, and he positively pummeled Evans in most other categories, especially in speed, where Evans was shockingly below average at 48.43. The 27-point speed percentile difference is pretty mind-boggling when considering both drivers were evenly matched championship contenders before this, and it made Cassidy the highest-rated Formula E driver and second highest overall in my open wheel model at 0.550 in 2025. He even beat Max Verstappen. However, I still went with Roland over Cassidy, not merely because he won the title, but also because I was more impressed by his advantage in passing and Cassidy's advantage in speed, like I said. Nonetheless, Cassidy, like Evans, was already overdue for a title even before the season started, and he's even more overdue now. After previously being the highest rated Super Formula driver in 2018 and 2019, as I mentioned, he became the first driver to be the highest rated driver in a season in both series. Maybe the fundamental bottom line here is that Formula E drivers deserve more respect. I honestly think on average they're better than IndyCar drivers, but because nobody cares about Formula E and everybody makes fun of it because of its gimmicks or just that nobody likes electric cars. Nobody takes its drivers as seriously as they should. I always find I end up rating them higher than everybody else does, and I especially rate touring car drivers higher than everybody else does. And I don't think that's an uneducated perspective. I think all these other lists are way too open wheel centric and reward a lot of open wheel mediocrity over a lot of greatness in series that have less ambiance or je ne sais quoi or whatever. Number 11, Lando Norris, last year 15th. Despite winning the F1 championship, Norris never was, is not, and probably never will be the best driver in F1. I talked him up very highly early and very early back in the day. I was going to rank him in the top 50 globally for an aborted 2016 top 100 list I never finished, back when I was occasionally posting articles on the short-lived racingreference.info blog section. In early 2018, before his Formula 2 career even started, I praised him for posting a faster average lap time in the 24 hours of Daytona than his co-driver, none other than Fernando Alonso. Since then, I have cooled on him after George Russell beat him soundly for the F2 title. He took quite a while to finally win, although that was not his fault. and he spent most of his title season being outperformed by his teammate Oscar Piastri, a driver who was still below average in my teammate model. McLaren's F1 operation in 2025 reminded me a great deal of Williams in 1996, when they had Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve, two drivers who were certainly lower tier greats, but neither driver was really up to the standards of your typical lead driver for the fastest team. The difference between 1996 and this year is that Michael Schumacher was unable to lift Ferrari to title contention, while Max Verstappen did lift his Red Bull to finish only 2 points behind Norris's McLaren. Admittedly, Schumacher was already elevating a Ferrari team that hadn't been real title contenders for half a decade after leaving Benetton, while Verstappen was coming off four straight title years for the same team. Nonetheless, the fact that both Norris and Piastri let Verstappen back into contention, unlike Williams versus Schumacher in 1996, is why I think I regard both McLaren drivers' seasons a little lower than the Williams drivers of 96. Also, it took Piastri until his second and third years to arguably match what Villeneuve did in his first two. I really do think if you put either Charles Leclerc or George Russell in a McLaren this year, they would have cinched the title earlier. Furthermore, for most of the season, it really looked like Piastri was poised to overtake Norris. Even after his late season collapse, Piastri beat Norris in most statistical categories, with 8 natural races led to Norris's 6, a 3-1 lead change record to Norris's 1-3, 8 TNL and races with the most lead shares to Norris's 5, 8 lead shares to Norris's 5.33, 7.74 CRL to Norris's 5.6. 8 races with the most laps led to Norris's 6, and 9 fastest races to Norris's 6. The only categories Norris actually beat Piastri in were poles 7 to 6, speed percentile 93.41 to 92.51, and most importantly, the actual championship. Piastri led more statistical categories than any driver this year. Pia- um, Piastri seemed to be better at passing and leading, while Norris's only main advantage was speed, and that's even counting the races after Piastri's collapse. Before that, he obviously held an even bigger edge. Given their current trajectories, it seems inevitable to me that Piastri will eventually overtake Norris, possibly as soon as this year. Still, I guess the fact that Norris won the title and Piastri finished third, and Norris did beat Piastri 12-8 in their teammate head-to-head, giving him a slightly higher single-season rating, should put him ahead, but I'm not feeling super confident about it. This feels sort of like Jimmy Vasser and Alex Zanardi in 1996, or Bobby Labonte and Tony Stewart in 2000, or Will Brown and Brock Feeney in 2024, when it was undeniable who was on the trajectory to be a greatly superior driver, but you can still debate those specific seasons. Well, no, I don't think you can debate Vassar versus Zanardi. Zanardi kicked his ass, even with Vassar eliminating him from championship contention before the end of the season, but the other two definitely. I'm glad he won a title. I'm not going to say he's undeserving, and I can rattle off a bunch of F1 champions who are worse, but let's just say he was lucky to get this one because it'll never happen again. Number 12, James Calado, last year's C-. Calado was, in my opinion, the best World Endurance Championship driver of the year, but not quite the best sports car driver, which I already acknowledged was Calvin van der Linde. Much like how Felipe Nasr led 8 out of 12 statistical categories in the IMSA GTP class, which pretty clearly made him the top driver in that class in my mind, Calado led 9 out of 12 categories in the WEC Hypercar class. Unlike Nasr, who finished third in IMSA points, Calado won the WEC title, which is why I put him higher. On the other hand, Nasr won the 24 Hours of Daytona and 12 Hours of Sebring, which are more important than the IMSA title, while Calado failed to win at Le Mans, which is also more important than the WEC title. Oh, I miswrote that. I wrote I still went for Nasr over Calado. I meant to say I still went for Calado over Nasr because he outperformed his fellow Ferrari drivers to a greater extent than Nasr outperformed his fellow Porsche drivers, even though the WEC Ferraris were even more dominant than the IMSA Porsches. Calado led all drivers with 2 natural races led, tied with Antonio Fuoco, a 4-0 lead change record, 2 wins, 2 TNL, 1.67 lead shares, 2 races with the most lead shares, 0.73 CRL, 2 races with the most laps led, and 1 fastest race tied with 7 other drivers. The only categories Collado didn't lead were poles, fastest laps, and speed percentile. So Collado had a lot of passing and dominance, but struggled with speed. Nonetheless, Collado led nearly every single dominance-related statistic, and those matter to me more, especially for a driver who drove for the most dominant team as Collado did. Sure, you can criticize the Collado Antonio Giovinazzi Pirgidi car for not winning Le Mans, but it was hardly Collado's fault. In fact, Collado had a great Le Mans as he passed his Ferrari teammate Phil Hansen 3 times, including the TNL, before Hansen's co-driver Robert Kubica eventually beat the Collado car out of the pits. Number 13, Ryan Blaney, last year 33. The main thing that stands out about Blaney this season is his head-to-head performances against his teammates, which were absolutely ridiculous. He beat Josh Berry 19-1, Austin Cindric 22-2, and defending champion Joey Logano 20-6 in the races where both sets of drivers finished. That allowed Blaney to lead my stock car model for the first time by a pretty large margin, as his rating of .296 was substantially better than William Byron's .205 and Kyle Larson's .204. What makes this even more astonishing is that not only did all 3 of his teammates win and make the playoffs, I counted Berry as a teammate since the Wood Brothers cars are prepared in the same shop as the Penske cars. But my model has historically underrated him and all the post-Kurt Busch Penske drivers. Since Brad Keselowski got blown out by Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Mark Martin, and especially Kurt Busch early on, and Logano likewise got blown out by Kyle Busch and Hamlin early on, and Keselowski and Logano were only teammates with each other for many years. Both Keselowski and Logano ended up lower than they should have been in my model because they both significantly improved when they were teammates with each other, which means as a result, all Penske drivers since have been underrated by probably at least as much as .05 in my model. Blaney's blowout could be even bigger if there wasn't this bias against the Penske drivers consistently in my model, because unfortunately Keselowski and Logano did not have significant links to anyone other than each other in the years when they were at their peak, and now they're both past prime, probably. Maybe I'm wrong about Logano being past prime, but I don't think so. It helped that Blaney did crash out of both Cindric and Berry's wins, so people would mark him down for all the crashes. But an analysis by Ryan McCafferty reported that none of them resulted from driver error, which is one of the main reasons I think he was better than Larson, despite Larson winning the title and Blaney failing to advance to the championship 4. Additionally, he also had the best speed percentile for the first time in his career, where he, Byron, and Larson ranked 1, 2, 3 in that order, just as they did in my model. For all his success, Blaney had actually only led one of my statistical categories before, races with the most lead shares in 2023, making his 3 instances of red ink this year easily his best. If Byron hadn't outdueled him at Martinsville and Blaney had won that race, his win in the season finale at Phoenix that the announcers pointedly ignored to focus on the championship battle would have given him his second title. Blaney even shored up some of his weaknesses, like road racing, where he led 35 laps from the pole at Watkins Glen. McCafferty's model also ranks him first, largely because he had the best pass differential, with 538 more passes for than against, and our models do not often agree. I don't think Ryan B's advantage over the rest of the field was as strong as Ryan M does, but I do agree he was the best, and it's weird how almost everybody will fight you if you try to suggest that on social media, because they seem to think that average finish or just scoring the most Latford points is what should win you the title, when no, it isn't. I don't think Blaney was head and shoulders above everybody else to the same extent that I think Ryan McCafferty does. I think Blaney and Larson and Byron and Hamlin were all pretty close. And I ended up putting Hamlin in my top 25. I didn't expect to, but I bumped him up, I guess, for sentimental reasons after his father's death, and I admit that. I had room to, and considering he was obviously strategizing to win the title. Like, there's a lot of things Hamlin wouldn't have done if he if you were racing in a full season points system. He would not have skipped the race in Mexico City. He absolutely would have started it if it was a full season points system. And obviously he wouldn't have had the engine failure at Martinsville. Um, Obviously they were experimenting. He had already locked himself in with the win at Las Vegas. So if he hadn't had the engine failure at Martinsville and he hadn't skipped that race in Mexico City, he obviously would have been way closer in points than he actually was. So, like, marking him down just on that for not being consistent when he obviously wasn't focusing on consistency. He was obviously focusing on maximizing his performance in the races that matter, and he did do that, and then had the title taken from him by a late caution and his team's inept strategy. So I ended up putting him in the top 25. And when you consider the fact that some races matter more than others and all, I don't think Blaney was head and shoulders above everybody else as much as some of my colleagues in this field do, but I do think he was clearly best. And those teammate records are insane, especially beating Logano 20-6. I mean, Logano was 35 years old last year, and I had previously argued that NASCAR drivers peak at 34. I know David Smith did an analysis of this and claimed that NASCAR drivers peak at 39. I always thought that was too old. I think 34 is closer to the truth. And Logano actually did win the title at 34 in 2024. He was nowhere near the best driver, but I mean, he was obviously throwing out half the schedule to only focus on the races that matter. Just make sure you get a win somewhere in the regular season. Experiment the rest of the season, and I bet he's not going to do that this year. And the dual win already indicates that might be over. That he might be taking the entire season seriously now. That he has to with the different format. So I don't think Blaney was head and shoulders above everybody. I didn't think he was above everybody. And it's weird how everybody on social media will fight you about that because all they care about is average finish and what people would have done under the Latford point system, as if that was a good measurement for who had the best season. Um, Number 14, Oscar Piastri, last year 24th. Piastri posted the best advanced statistics of any F1 driver in 2025, and it's undeniable that he improved more than any veteran driver this season. Normally, I rate breakout seasons really, really highly based on the argument that it is easier for drivers to sustain their level of performance from previous seasons than to elevate their game to the next level. Furthermore, I also really rate seasons highly when a number two driver begins to overtake or fully overtakes the previous team leader, and Piastri certainly did that this season. I'm not going to repeat all his baseline statistics here because I reveal them in the entry for Piastri's teammate Lando Norris, but he either matched or beat Norris in all statistical categories I tracked this year, except for poles, their teammate head-to-head in the championship. But I'm still a little skeptical about him. Midway through the season, when he was dominating the championship, he finally crept above average overall in my open wheel model, but after his late season collapse, his rating fell to minus 0.004. He's mostly being weighed down by his Formula 3 season, where he did win the title, but only beat his teammate Logan Sargent, who turned out to be very awful, by 4 points. To be fair, Piastri won that title as a rookie while Sargent was in his second year, and obviously their careers have progressed very differently in the years since, but it still gives me pause. I couldn't help thinking that the McLaren cars were better than both Norris and Piastri all year, which is why this particular combo brought the Hill Villeneuve combo to mind for me. Although, granted, I do think in the long run, both of these guys will be better than both of them. I was still strongly considering rating Piastri in the top 5 globally for much of this year for taking control of the team from Norris, but then that didn't exactly happen, did it? Nonetheless, Piastri probably provided the season's most exciting moments. There were only 7 on-track lead changes in F1 this year, pathetic. Piastri had 3 of them, Max Verstappen had 3, and Norris had 1. He even forced Verstappen into one of his 2 big mistakes at Miami when he forced him off the track, which I did count as a pass, although I'm not always consistent on that. Given that he seems to be improving at a faster trajectory than Norris did, he won both the F3 and F2 titles as a rookie, which Norris didn't, and he now has 9 wins at an age when Norris only had 1. I think it's safe to say Piastri is going to be better. You could argue he already is better, but I deferred to the title and rating Norris higher after Piastri's inexplicable collapse. Nonetheless, I think that much like we saw with Feeney and Brown this year, I'm pretty sure Piastri will be better than Norris almost every year here on out. Will it result in a championship? I guess it depends on whether McLaren remains on top after the new regulations. I mean, I'm thinking George Russell's going to win the title, but I have no idea if their Mercedes are going to be faster than McLaren's Mercedes or not. Number 15, Shosu Boy. Again, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't think I've ever watched any Super GT footage. Last year's second. For most of the season, it looked like Suboi would back up his 2024 season when he won the Super Formula and Super GT titles in the same year by simultaneously defending both championships. If he did that, I might have rated him in the top 5 again, just like last year when I ranked him second, and the year before when I ranked Ritomo Miyata third, although I lowered Miyata's 2023 to fifth in retrospect. However, Ayumu Iwasa overtook Suboi for the Super Formula Championship when he won the final race at Suzuka, while Suboi only finished eighth. I still think Suboi was better because he and Kenta Yamashita successfully defended their Super GT title, where they won 3 races, just like they did last year, while Iwasa did not compete there. As I mentioned in the Iwasa entry, Suboi remains the highest rated Super Formula driver in my open wheel model overall, even though Iwasa's single season rating of .396 was a lot better than Suboi's .203. Suboi also earned his first class win in the 24 Hours of Fuji, but that race is not exactly on the same level as most of the world's other 24-hour races. I dropped Suboi significantly for losing the Super Formula title, but he hasn't stopped being elite just because he only won 1 title instead of 2. I hope you people who just joined, especially you, Ignacio, because I know you're not a paid subscriber, I hope you can rewind to the beginning because, yes, I'm reading through my list. I'm going to do the top 25 now, and I'm going to hope this automatically uploads to YouTube. It might not, and I might just lose it, so I might have to read it again. Um, Number 16, Felipe Nasr, last year 73rd. Even though Nasr didn't win the IMSA GTP title, I think he was pretty clearly the best IMSA driver of 2025. In addition to starting the year with 3 consecutive wins, including the 2 most important ones, the 24 Hours of Daytona and 12 Hours of Sebring, Nasr led most statistical categories and was the most dominant driver in general, with 4 natural races led, 3 wins, 2 TNL, 1.53 lead shares, 2 races with the most lead shares, 1.66 CRL, 3 races with the most laps led, and 2 fastest laps. The only categories where Nasr did not lead were lead change record, where his 6-5 record trailed Jack Aitken's 3-1, although Nasr did tie his teammate Nick Tandy for the most lead changes this year. Poles, Dries Van Toor had 4. Fastest races, Frederick Vesti had 2. And speed percentile, where Tandy was surprisingly much faster at 78.72 to Nasr's 60.29. Nonetheless, considering how deep the GTP class was and how many strong drivers it had, it's pretty difficult for one driver to lead 8 of the 12 statistical categories I track, and Nasr did that. His numbers were so impressive that I like him over Tandy, even though Tandy got all the hype for completing his career 24-hour Grand Slam. Their Penske teammates Matthew Jaminet and Matt Campbell, who actually won the title, and even WEC's top Penske Porsche driver Kevin Estra, who was nowhere near as dominant there as Nasr. Number 17, Kyle Larson, last year 4th. Even though Larson's teammate William Byron knows Larson out in both my model and in speed percentile, and Byron was 3rd in Ryan McCafferty's model to Larson's 5th, I think Larson was better, and not just because he won the title. Byron's advantages were that he was the most dominant driver this year in terms of laps led and also CRL, taking the lead in both of these categories with his clutch win in the penultimate race at Martinsville, where he and Ryan Blaney battled for the win with both drivers needing to win to advance since they were far below the playoff cut line. I get why most people would want to give Byron the edge because he was more dominant, had the better average running position, made fewer mistakes, and was less lucky. Larson also had a sloppy summer with several unforced errors, and he became the butt of jokes when he crashed out of both races in the Memorial Day double of the Indy 500 and Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte. Many fans felt schadenfreude every time he crashed because he once stupidly said he was better than Max Verstappen. People took that to mean that he was saying he was the best driver in the world. But Larson's often not too bright, so he probably thinks Brad Sweet is the best driver in the world or something. Um, nothing against Sweet. Great dirt track driver, won a bunch of World of Outlaws titles, but Larson's the kind of guy who's like, dirt racing is where it's at. Dirt racing is real racing. If it ain't dirt, it ain't nothing. I mean, it does feel like he's just in NASCAR for the money at times, just as it did for Tony Stewart. So I really do think he probably does think that somebody like Brad Sweet or Logan Seavey or Justin Grant or whoever is really the best driver in the world because they're best in these domestic niche disciplines. And I rate those drivers very highly. I am going to have all of them on my list. Seavey and Grant are thousand greatest drivers locks. I um I don't think I have Sweet there yet, and he just retired, so he might not get there. But I have him only a few points from lock status. It's not like I don't respect those drivers, but Larson has a very parochial racing perspective, I think, as evidenced by 2020 and shit. Um, it seems one of the effects of the internet thriving on negativity is an intense focus on risk aversion because nobody wants their negative moments to go viral and make them the butt of jokes, as I can attest. So it seems like nowadays people rate drivers exclusively on crash avoidance, even though the drivers like Chris Buescher that seldom crash usually aren't taking enough risks to fight for wins, which is why one of them is a two-time champion, while the other usually misses the playoffs. Now, I wrote that before this new chase format was introduced. I do think this new chase format helps Chris Buescher a lot because he's good at padding points, and now he doesn't have to worry about people who are like 25th in points winning from below the cut line. So Austin Dillon is not going to bump him out this time, or Harrison Burton is not going to bump him out this time, and he can just plod along, finishing 6th to 15th every week, just like he always does, never really contending, but um, always finishing above average and plod his way to being like 12th in points at the start of the chase. So we'll probably at least make it this time, but I mean, it's really a boring way to race. Larson knows that in a win-it-in format, you have to make aggressive moves to maximize winning chances, which can often backfire. If NASCAR had a sensible full-season point system where all races counted the same, I bet Larson would crash substantially less, and he's incentivized to drive like that because of the format more than his own stupidity, in my opinion. Yeah, that doesn't explain Indy. I think Indy was hubris. Um, He'd probably have to fully commit to a full IndyCar season or something like Jimmy Johnson did. Then I bet he'd be really good at Indy. Um, but it seems like that's a much harder transition to make than it used to be, like when Tony Stewart was in the IRL and there was not a lot of competition. Um, it will be interesting if Larson cleans up his style with NASCAR returning to a 10 race chase, which hasn't existed since before Larson joined the Cup Series. As a result, when rating NASCAR drivers and only rating NASCAR drivers because few other systems have a points format like this, I don't really care about consistency. It's obvious the teams are focused on maximizing championship chances, and you should not weigh all races equally when determining which driver had the best season when the playoff system is not incentivized to reward consistency. The main reason I'm choosing Larson over Byron is because I feel Larson outperformed the speed of his cars and Byron underperformed his, mainly because Larson's lead change record of 38 and 25 was vastly superior to Byron's 29 and 29. While both drivers won 3 races and led the most laps 5 times, with Larson and Byron nearly tying in both my model and in speed percentile, Larson was the lead share leader with 4.36 to Byron's 2.86, and that, in my opinion, is the most important statistic when evaluating NASCAR drivers because people who put themselves in the lead through their own volition are maximizing their chances of winning, which, in my opinion, maximizes their chances of winning the championship format in that championship format. I might have to revise that this year. I realized Larson was substantially better in the first third of the season than the last two thirds, and a lot of his slopping and had a lot of sloppiness and mediocrity later in the season. But the same could be said for Kyle Busch's 2019, and you could argue he was the best that year too. I think I would actually. I don't argue Larson was the best. Ryan Blaney was better, but Larson's 4.36 lead shares versus 3.61 CRL indicates he was putting himself into the lead through his own efforts more than his team was, while Byron's 4.15 CRL versus 2.86 lead shares indicates Byron's team was doing more of the work than he was. That makes a difference for me. Larson also led all drivers in natural races led with 16, races with the most lead shares 7, and races with the most laps led 5. Yes, the way he won the title was kind of a buzzkill, but I do think he was better than Denny Hamlin over the season, and he did lead the full season point standings as well if you care about that, which I don't particularly. Number 18, Jan Erlache, last year's 67th. The nephew of four-time World Touring Car champion Yvonne Muller is arguably well on his way to overtake his uncle historically, but no one will likely care because the TCR World Tour is held in substantially lower regard than its predecessor WTCC and is far less professionally run. I, for one, care vastly less about how prestigious a series is and how much media hype it gets than it seems most people do. What I care about is the level of performance when adjusting for the level of equipment and competition, which doesn't necessarily have much to do with how much attention a series gets. This is why I rate drivers in some series like Formula E, Porsche Super Cup, and almost any touring car series higher than most people do, and why you'll never see me agreeing with those people who think all the top 15 F1 drivers are the top 15 drivers in the world, like a lot of people seem to. You know who you are. Yeah, Nico Hulkenberg is totally better than Tom Ingram or something. Um, Although the TCR has a much lower status than the WTCC did, what Erlache is doing is still very top-notch. Although Erlache will not likely catch Muller's 107 major touring car wins since he only has 18, he is ahead of Muller's pace as his third TCR World Tour Championship this year at the age of 29 is more championships than Muller had at that age, and he's ahead of him in my touring car Model 2. He pretty much dominated the season to a larger extent than it looked, although he only beat his strongest teammate, Cyan Racing teammate Ted Bjork, by 24 points in the championship, and they were very evenly matched in teammate head-to-heads, with Erlache also narrowly beating Bjork 0.378 to 0.363 in my model this year. Erlache was a lot more dominant by all other metrics. He had 5 natural races led to Bjork's 2, 4 on-track passes for the lead to Bjork's 1, 4 wins to Bjork's 3, 5 TNL to Bjork's 2, as one of Bjork's wins came as a result of Erlache receiving a dubious 5-second penalty for leaving the track to make a pass that cost him the season-opening race at Mexico City in a season when several other such passes went unpunished. 3.83 lead shares to Bjork's 1.67, 3.73 CRL to Bjork's 1.43, and 4 races with the most laps led to Bjork's 1. Bjork did tie Erlache for the most poles. In fact, all 8 qualifying sessions had a different pole sitter, and beat him in fastest laps 3-1, but that was it. Despite how similar Erlache and Bjork were in terms of consistency and actual finishing results, Erlache's dominance in all other metrics was too massive for P to not put him in a tier by himself. Number 19, Pato O'Ward, last year 39th. Although O'Ward finished a distant second in IndyCar points to Alex Palou, and Palou also overtook him to be the highest rated active IndyCar driver in my open wheel model, I think O'Ward was still pretty comfortably the second best driver in the series, even though at various points it looked like O'Ward's new teammate Christian Lundgaard would grab a win this year, and I'm going to be shocked as hell if Lundgaard doesn't win in 2026. Award remains both the only McLaren driver to win an IndyCar since the team's return in 2020, as well as the highest rated McLaren driver in my open wheel model in general. That's right, he's higher than both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. I'm sure most people would find the idea of Award as a better driver than them to be laughable, but I don't actually. I think it's true. Um, He's the only driver to win for McLaren still since their comeback, McLaren IndyCar, which means he's one of a grand total of 2 IndyCar drivers to win for them, along with Johnny Rutherford before I was even born. I think Gordon Johncock drove for them and didn't win, if I am remembering right. Um, Whereas I think several other drivers could have won in the McLaren F1 cars. Now, I did take Norris and Piastri over O'Warren for the season, but overall, I still think I'd take O'Warren over them. Um, I'm sure a lot of people would rate Kyle Kirkwood as the second best driver because he won 3 races to O'Warren's 2 in a season where last year's best IndyCar driver Colton Herta went winless. However, Herta was faster than Kirkwood this year, and I think Kirkwood was mostly just luckier, while O'Warren was typically faster than Lundgaard everywhere, and his crushing of Lundgaard impresses me more than Kirkwood running more comparably to Herta, although I certainly took Kirkwood over Herta. Although Palou passing Award for the lead late in the race at Thermal and winning by 10 seconds served as a premonition for how the rest of the season would go, Award rebounded with wins at Iowa and Toronto and built up enough of a gap to clinch second place before the season ended. Obviously, in the year of Palou, Award led no statistical categories, and his 3-5 lead change record is 1.25 lead shares, which only ranked fifth, and his .143 driver rating, which only ranks sixth, aren't great. But I still think the McLaren IndyCar team is very good, and I'm pretty sure they would still be career winless without him. They might have left the series by now if they hadn't had him. While I'll concede Palou is better than Award, which I was not as willing to concede a year or two ago, I still think they're closer than most other people seem to. Although this was kind of a boring season for him and everyone else, in my opinion, as the quality of the racing in IndyCar this season was the worst since 2010, and I stand by that. That was painful to pay attention to, and I was somebody who, for, like, the entire 2010s was hyping, "IndyCar is awesome, NASCAR sucks." That's what it was like for all the 2010s. I'm totally flipped now. 2020s, I have drastically preferred NASCAR to IndyCar. I think Ford is going to win the Daytona 500, Patrick, and the Fords looked so dominant in the first dual race with the um 4 RFK cars, even Ryan Preece and Corey LaJoie, who I did not expect to do much. They were 1, 2, 3, 4 for the entire stint before their pit stop, and then they ended up falling back a bit because they had to take more fuel because they were in front the whole time. And then Logano and Blaney jumped up there, but then Logano and Blaney stayed up there the entire time for the rest of the Fords seemed to have a significant advantage in speed. Now, obviously, you can't predict who will crash and who won't, and then perhaps all the favorites will crash, but because that happens frequently in the Daytona 500. But after Logano's dual win of the speed the Ford showed in the RFK, I like Ford. I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney. He has He has a certain grit and determination and ability to make the right move at the right time in a way I don't see from many other drivers. He's like one of the closest to seeing the air or whatever, as they used to say about Earnhardt. Um, Very, very clutch performer in these sort of races. The same thing could be said for Keselowski too, back in the day. I just don't know about now because Keselowski is not as fast as he was, obviously, and he, like, tries too hard, he's too aggressive, he makes his moves too early, he often wrecks himself out, he often spins out, he was good at Keselowski was good at making these clutch passes at Talladega a lot of the time, um, in must-win scenarios sometimes. but that was also a long time ago, like 2014 is the year I'm thinking of, I guess, when he did that, and I feel he's lost his edge, so I don't think it'll be him. I mean, it could easily be Logano also. I could see that too. Um, I just think Blaney has more fire than Logano does, and I like him better. Priest Priest, I just think is still pretty second rate. I did put him in my top 200 list last year for the first time, but it wouldn't surprise me if I never do again. I really don't think even what Priest did last year was sustainable. And I know he just won the Clash, but I mean that was hardly a real NASCAR race. It was a quarter mile race at Bowman Gray Stadium, which is probably more similar to the um modified racing he used to do, so his modified stuff probably gave him an edge there with that kind of racing that the Cup Series regulars didn't have. I still wouldn't be surprised if Priest never wins a Cup race in his career. I would guess now that Priest will probably win one race. It wouldn't surprise me if he won 0, 1, or 2. It would shock me if he ever won more than 2. Um, as for the rest of the Fords, Chris Buescher just is not aggressive enough. He Buescher drives great for if it was like 1997 and you had these long green flag runs where you had like 80 laps of green and you just click off one consistent lap after another. You close up on somebody and then you pass them one on one. You're not in a pack. I know Buescher won a plate race once. He won at Daytona once, but he just if he was even a little bit more aggressive, he'd probably be a perennial championship contender, but it seems he's never going to do that. He wants to be nice more than he wants to win, and that makes him admirable as a person. I certainly like Buescher a lot. I like having him around. I respect him. I think he's good. I'm pretty high on him. I've been rating him for a while. In fact, my I was ahead of the curve on him because my model actually had Chris Buescher as the number 1, um, driver of 2021 because of how badly he beat Ryan Newman that year. He was number 1 in my model, and I put Buescher in, um, my top 200 that year, and, um, the other people in my Discord laughed at me for it, and that aged really well, I think. Um when I launched my stock car model and I saw that Buescher was only barely behind Brad Keselowski in it, I predicted that Keselowski and Buescher would be close as teammates, and they were, and I was right about that, and everybody who thought Keselowski would steamroll him were wrong. So yeah, I was early on Buescher, but it just doesn't seem he's aggressive enough to do as much as it feels like he should be doing. Like almost anybody else in that Kansas race would have roughed up Larson just slightly or just enough to win in that photo finish, and then he wouldn't have had to worry about not making the playoffs. It seems like Buescher wants to be nice more than he wants to win, and it's admirable. I like him, I rate him, but am I ever going to pick him to win a plate race? No. Would it surprise me if he did? Actually, a little, yeah. Um, who does that leave as far as the Fords go? Josh Berry, not a chance in hell. Um, Austin Cindric. Oh yeah, Cindric's always good in these things. Yeah, that could easily happen. I don't really know why he didn't show up in the duels, but based on how fast Blaney or Logano were, it wouldn't surprise me if Cindric did it again. That would be annoying, having another driver as bad as Michael Waltrip as a two-time winner, but whatever. And yeah, I did not actually read your, data, Chris, but I'm not surprised that you had Blaney favored also. I will go back and read through 20 to 25. Um, Number 20, William Byron, last year 66th. Although I ended up taking him third, a strong case could be made that Byron was the best NASCAR driver this year. While I wasn't updating my statistical table for most of the year due to visiting mom in the nursing home and my other work, when I did finally catch up on my table, Byron was leading in speed percentile, and then he, Larson, and Ryan Blaney traded it off in the closing weeks of the season. I didn't know which way it would go. In addition to leading all drivers with 1,330 laps led, 4.15 CRL, six fastest races, and five races with the most laps led, tied with Larson and Joey Logano for the most. LOL Logano. He also had the most consistent performance with an average running position of 11, one position better than any other driver, and led the full season point system for most of the regular season until his cut tire with 2 laps remaining in regulation at Phoenix handed Larson both the overall and full season championships when using stage points. Despite posting the best ARP, he actually only ranked 8th in average finish. Admittedly, that sort of discrepancy is almost entirely a result of bad luck, but I'm not sure I'd say it completely is. Byron's Spring Darlington race stood out when he led 243 laps from the pole at the Southern 500 before his decision to make his final pit stop later in a seeming gamble to lead every lap ended up costing him the race. I still think Byron was right to do that. I mean, the last time the last time anybody had led every lap in a race was Jeff Burton in 2000 at Loudon when Byron was 3. So, um, that's such a historic and generational thing to do that I guess going for it if you're so close makes more sense than maximizing your chances for winning, but obviously he wasn't maximizing his chances of winning by doing that, but I don't blame him for trying that and hoping for a caution while he had the field lap. That made sense to me. Um, he then got out-dueled after leading 283 laps by Ross Chastain at the Coca-Cola 600, who only ranked 16th in speed this season. I mean, that's insane. Chastain out-dueling somebody and almost making the final 8, ranking 16th in speed. Despite Byron's consistent performances, he failed to win with some dominant cars, helping to explain his massive difference between his CRL and his lead shares. Granted, most of that comes down to Darlington. Since he won the pole and did not make a pass for the lead, he got no lead shares for that race, and Ryan Blaney ended up getting an entire lead share, even though he only led a couple laps before whoever beat him out of the pits. I don't even remember who won that race. Who won that race? Was it Hamlin? I think it was Hamlin. Um, Even without that race, Byron still was more reliant on his team's efforts to get the lead as opposed to Larson, who had a much better lead change record, which is why I narrowly rated Larson over Byron. Byron did have some advantages, and the main one was that he made fewer mistakes than Larson. But in the point system where consistently no longer matters and drivers are focused on maximizing winning chances, I think Larson was more successful in what he intended to do, even though most people think he was disappointing because he crashed more and he had higher expectations. Again, this is just social media bias. As I said in the Larson entry, people now favor risk aversion and avoiding viral moments. So if there's a viral moment like a crash or something that ends up being what your entire career is defined by, that's why everybody now says that Corey LaJoy always sucked when I don't think that is true. He sucked in 2024 and um probably since, but he was doing some impressive stuff in his early years for Spire, and nobody cares because all anybody cares is how much you crash. Which is insane in an era when NASCAR was incentivizing win and in and incentivizing people to crash. But so I guess that's why for NASCAR I don't judge overdriving as harshly. At least I didn't. Now I might have to revise that for this year. Um Byron's dominant win at Iowa was impressive, and his clutch win at Martinsville from below the playoff cut line to advance to the championship four was probably the best in his career. His Daytona 500 win wasn't impressive at all, as he took the lead from the seventh after the leaders crashed in front of him. I mean, I think anybody would have wanted that position, regardless of who it was, even if it was a prolific crasher, even if it was Stenhouse sitting there, he'd have probably won. Overall, I think Blaney was best while Byron and Larson were evenly matched, with both nearly tying in both speed percentile on my stock car model. But I prefer Larson's season not so much because he won the title as because he did more in his best races through his own efforts, while Byron seemed to more frequently throw away races with dominant cars. 2000 Loudon restrictor plate race was nuts. I mean, honestly, it didn't seem all that different from a lot of other Loudon races. Crash after crash after crash. But I mean, there were other races like that. The 2002 race that Ward Burton won was like that. Um, I can think of several others, but I'm blanking on them. I think that 1997 race where Jeff Gordon and Ernie Irvan had their duel had a lot of crashes in it. It didn't really seem that different from other Loudon races. It was a stupid idea to add restrictor plates when the issue was stuck throttles, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess it worked. I don't think it was the worst race ever or anything, like a lot of people seem to think. And in fact, the fact that Jeff Burton led every lap added to the interest there. Um, there were plenty of boring Loudon races, like the one Ryan Newman won in his rookie season, where like nothing happened, and yet there were some lead changes. So at least it doesn't even have that distinction. Although I guess Newman winning as a rookie was impressive, but I don't know. It didn't feel like that unusual a Loudon race for me. It certainly felt like more like all the other Loudon races than all the other plate races. Number 21, Antonio Fuoco. With Fuoco's third consecutive elite season, he becomes a lock for the first time on my 1,000 greatest drivers list. Although he only finished third in points this year, he and oh, I put a comma there where one didn't belong. In a year, he and his AF Corsa Ferrari WEC teammates swept the top 3 points positions, and I think Fuoco was clearly second best of the 9 Ferrari drivers this season. Fuoco was, along with James Calado, the only driver in the hypercar class with 2 natural races led, although I took Calado higher, especially because he won the championship. Fuoco likewise ranked second to Calado in lead change record, 2-0 to Calado's 4-0, and lead shares, and his speed percentile of 70.13 was also second best among the Ferrari drivers behind Robert Kubica's 71.70. I understand why a lot of people would rather list Kubica higher because he won Le Mans, and it was a heartwarming story in completing his comeback after his rallying injuries. But Kubica won that race in the pits, while Fuoco was more singularly responsible for his accomplishments. Fuoco finished third in points, I think, mainly because his co-drivers Miguel Molina and Nicholas Nielsen were dragging him down. Molina was the second slowest Ferrari driver at 48.64, although he did have a TNL and full lead share, putting him not far behind Fuoco's 1.07 lead shares, and Nielsen had no passes for the lead when 5 of the other 8 Ferrari drivers did. Even though I had Collado better this year, Fuoco seems to have been the most consistent in performance year after year after year among the Ferrari sports car drivers. He is always great, while his fellow Ferrari drivers tend to have sharper gaps between their up and down seasons. That's why he's a lock. Number 22. Augustine Canapino. Last year not rated. This does not excite me, but I do have to do it. While I was initially a Canapino defender when the American motorsports media were dismissing his accomplishments when he landed his IndyCar ride, he lost me when his fan base introduced soccer hooliganry antics to IndyCar. I really hated how his fans bullied Callum Ilott for what was basically nothing. Now, I guess I'm too biased towards Ilott, who is definitely a much more mediocre driver overall than Canapino is. I know Canapino is one of the best touring car drivers of the 21st century, while Ilott is just an average Indy car driver, basically. You don't have to tell me that, I know, but Ilott is generally so clean, and Canapino really isn't, and to see his fans go after him in such a way, and Canapino's sort of egging them on sometimes. I don't like him very much, but I don't try to rate drivers based on who I like and who I don't. Um, I acknowledge he deserves a high placement. He lost me when his fan base introduced soccer hooligan antics to IndyCar, and I honestly expected his IndyCar career to be much better than it was. Well, like, I remember back then, Marshall Pruitt was, like, pissed about Canapino getting an IndyCar, right? And I looked up his past career, and I was like, "This guy's amazing." I mean, I get it, especially after Scott McLaughlin had his successful crossover, it was worth a shot, but Canapino did way worse than I thought he was gonna do. I did not expect, like, Connor Daly to replace him and improve upon him, considering Daly is a driver I have always considered to be bad. Yes, he's a pretty good oval driver now. But Canapino ended up being more like Jimmy Johnson in IndyCar than he was like Scott McLaughlin, and that really wasn't what I expected. I thought he was at least gonna contend to eventually be a winner or something, or at least something like Marcus Armstrong, but way worse than I expected. But Marshall Pruitt was, like, utterly dismissive about the Argentina scene, and I really felt he should have known better than that, saying that it was just this regional thing and his dominance didn't matter, even though plenty of the drivers from there, like Jose Maria Lopez and Nestor Girolami and probably mispronounced it, and Matthias Rossi have done things in much more prestigious series that were very impressive. Um So I expected much, and then when Canapino was actually in IndyCar, Pruitt ended up being amazed by how much he impressed him when he actually failed to meet my expectations because I had more correctly set higher expectations. I did not expect him to basically be like what Jimmy Johnson was at Ganassi there. Okay, a lot less spinning, I'll admit, but however, Canapino remains one of the best touring car drivers in the world, and this might have been his best year yet. For the fourth time in his career, Canapino won multiple titles. He had his winningest season in Argentina's most prestigious touring car series, Turismo Carretera, where he won 6 times. He also claimed the TC Pickup Championship, where he won 3 times, and the new Turcar 2000 Championship with another 4 wins. I admit I find this whole scene largely confusing because they recycle all the names for their series over and over again. Turcar 2000 is technically short for Turismo Carretera 2000, but it is not to be confused with either the established Turismo Carretera series or TC 2000, which is short for Turismo Competición. There was also a period when TC 2000 renamed itself Super TC 2000. Yet in that era, the minor league feeder series still used the name TC 2000. And then there's TC Pista, TC Moras, and TC Pista Moras, which are all feeder series at different levels. Many of the top drivers compete in some, but not all of these series simultaneously. And it took me years before I felt I finally had this straight. But now I do, and this is probably the best season in this discipline in at least a decade. Canapino also won one Class 3 win in Turismo Nacional. He did not have a teammate rating this year since none of his teammates in any of these series made a professional start at any point, but these were still clearly elite performances. Number 23, Nick Tandy, last year 97th. With his season opening wins in the 24 Hours of Daytona and 12 Hours of Sebring last year, Tandy achieved something we may never see again. His Daytona win made him the first driver ever to score overall wins in all 4 of the major 24-hour races: Le Mans, Daytona, Spa, and Nürburgring. And if you consider Sebring and the Petit Le Mans the next 2 most important sports car races, which many do, he's won both of them as well. However, he didn't do all of that in one season, so I'm not going to automatically rate him as the highest sports car driver simply based because of that. What made him elite was his overall IMSA performance. He led all drivers in the GTP class with a speed percentile of 78.72 and had a 6 and 3 lead change record this season, slightly better than his co-driver Felipe Nasr's 6 and 5, and both of them were a lot better than Laurent Vantour in most statistical categories. However, Tandy trailed Nasr in most other statistical categories, which is why I ranked him higher. Although Tandy and Nazar's three straight wins to start the season made them the prohibitive favorites to win the title, and they did win the Michelin Endurance Cup for the GTP class, four straight finishes of 10th or worse to end the season dropped them to third in points, while their teammates Matthew Jaminet and Matt Campbell won the title because they were much more consistent. However, they were nowhere near as competitive in the actual races. Tandy and Nazar were much more dominant and much better passers, and they also swept the two biggest races of the season, which are still probably bigger than actually winning the IMSA title would be. When considering Tandy was also the fastest driver, and Nazar led most statistical categories in terms of passing and dominance, I don't think Jaminet and Campbell were even close. Number 24, Matt Payne. Last year, C. Maybe a little controversial for me to take Payne over Chaz Mostert, but I had my reasons. While this year's best driver in supercars was exceedingly obvious, it was a tough decision whether to rate Payne or eventual champion Chaz Mostert in second place. On the surface, you have to take Mostert because he won the title while his teammate Ryan Wood finished 10th in points, while Payne finished fifth in points after failing to advance to the championship round at Adelaide, while his rookie teammate Kay Allen actually made the championship round. Not to mention that Mostert was consistently leading all supercars drivers in my model for years, even before Shane Van Gisbergen left the series, and Mostert is still the overall leader in my touring car model among supercars drivers now. However, I ultimately went with Payne because he beat Allen by a much bigger margin than Mostert beat Wood in performance, regardless of the actual random number generator championship finish this year. In a year when Brock Feeney was clearly the best driver, yet he ended up finishing behind his teammate Will Brown in points, who he had destroyed all season, I won't criticize Payne for not getting the points finish he deserved for the same reasons. Allen and Wood were similar drivers when they were in Super 2 together, as Allen won the Super 2 title and two races as an 18-year-old, while Wood finished third in points with five wins as a 20-year-old. Both were rookies. Since younger drivers show more potential for improvement, it seems likely that they will be roughly equally good in the long run. Yet Payne beat Allen by a staggering 24.67 percentage points in speed percentile, worse than any of the other Supercars championship contenders did. Furthermore, Payne's five wins were the most in Grove Racing team history by far, even if you include the team's earlier years as Kelly Racing from 2009 to 2020, while Mostert's Walkinshaw Andretti United team, although it had struggled for a while, had a long-running championship caliber history prior to that. Mostert did actually beat Wood worse when Wood was a rookie than Payne beat Allen this year, but I have to give him more credit for elevating Grove Racing, while Mostert, honestly, title or not, had his worst head-to-head teammate comparison in a decade, even though he did still outperform Wood. Payne led all drivers with a 3-0 lead change record, and he also won the Bathurst 1000, which many people consider to be more important than the Supercars Championship anyway. I suppose I could have counted James Golding's last lap pass of Payne against him, except that Payne would obviously not have let him pass so easily if Payne hadn't known Golding was going to be hit with a 5-second post-race penalty at Bathurst. Payne also ranks second in most statistical categories, including wins 5, TNL 4, lead shares 3.67, races with the most lead shares 4, CRL 3.12, and races with the most laps led 3, despite only ranking fourth in speed, which suggests he was pushing above his own weight since his numbers were consistently a little better than Mostert's, despite Mostert posting a slightly higher speed percentile. I don't care that Payne failed to make the championship round. Much like it's not Feeney's fault that Ryan Wood wrecked him, it's not Payne's fault that Cam Waters wrecked him at Sandown to knock him out of the championship round. But much like Ryan Blaney, he put an exclamation point on his season by winning the season finale at Adelaide, making a clean pass on pole sitter Feeney before Wood wrecked him a few quarters later. I wouldn't quite say Payne was as good as Blaney, since Blaney was clearly the best NASCAR driver in my opinion, while Payne wasn't even the best supercars driver born in October 2002. That's crazy that Payne and Feeney were born in the same month. I guess that's like Mark Martin and Ernie Irvan being born 4 days, apart, and, Brett Bodine was born in between them, which was a wild coincidence. Um, but but Payne still had one hell of a breakout, even if it got overshadowed by both Feeney's greater dominance and Mostert's title. All right, number 25, last one I'm reading tonight. Denny Hamlin, last year 55th. Hamlin was a sentimental favorite for the NASCAR championship because with 60 wins, he's the winningest driver without one. He likely has few chances at a championship left, and he gained some support from fans who previously hated him when he filed his antitrust suit against NASCAR and his father's terminal illness. Tragically, in the time between when I originally wrote this and when I finished the list, Hamlin's father died in a house fire. Although I was going to rate him only E minus, I had room and I bumped him up to the last E slot for sentimental reasons in the wake of this, particularly considering how stupid the way he lost the championship was. After years of futility, Hamlin did what he needed to do in the knockout championship format to win a title. I thought he was the championship favorite when he won the opening race in the round of 8 at Las Vegas, since as Joey Logano proved twice, that essentially gives you time to ignore the next two races and place all emphasis on the winner-take-all finale, which often grants drivers an edge. It indeed did so for Hamlin, who won the pole for the Phoenix season finale. Despite all four Championship Ford drivers having flat tires in the finale, he recovered from his to retake the lead in a truly dominant drive until fellow Championship Ford combatant William Byron lost a tire with 2 laps to go while running second, resulting in an overtime restart. This forced everyone to take tires. Hamlin's team's decision to take 4 tires instead of 2 dropped him to 10th, but he was unable to overtake Kyle Larson, who beat him out of the pits, resulting in a 5th place finish and 2nd place championship finish. Because Hamlin was the sentimental favorite and was better in the playoffs than Larson, not to mention that Hamlin certainly performed better in the race, and Larson continues to receive backlash due to his ego, his crashing, and probably a lot of people who still can't look past 2020. People were freaking pissed. The backlash of this result was nowhere near the backlash when a late safety car period at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix handed Max Verstappen the 2021 title over Lewis Hamilton, but it had a similar character. I will say for this the same thing I said there. Hamlin, like Hamilton, certainly performed better in the race, but Larson, like Verstappen, was more deserving of the championship. I get why people think Hamlin was better, and it's probably because expectations were lower. Hamlin lost his crew chief, Chris Gabehart, who revived his career in 2019. Gabehart was replaced by Chris Gale, who had never won a race with Hamlin's teammate Ty Gibbs this year, so many people expected Hamlin to fade to mediocrity and Christopher Bell to become the undisputed team leader at Joe Gibbs Racing. While Bell was certainly more consistent, I definitely think Hamlin was the JGR team leader, and he definitely had the better strategy for this championship format. Meanwhile, Larson was the undisputed best driver of 2024, and he certainly wasn't this year, which made his season look worse than it actually was. The main reason I am ranking Hamlin lower than Blaney, Byron, and Larson is that I think the JGR cars were faster than the Hendrick Motorsports and Team Penske cars. Hamlin led the way with 9 fastest laps, but that was the only category he led other than his 6 wins. This also came in a year when Chase Briscoe, a driver I previously considered to be somewhat mediocre, won 7 poles, while Bell, Briscoe, Bubba Wallace, and even Tyler Reddick, the latter two of which drive for Hamlin's own team, all posted the best speed percentiles of their careers, even though Reddick especially had a very mediocre season by his standards otherwise. Alex Bowman is more proven than Gibbs, but Bowman had a miserable season while Gibbs dominated at Bristol and actually was more dominant this year than even Bell was. When you consider all that together, I think the Toyotas were faster than the Chevys, and all the JGR drivers slightly underachieved their cars. While Hamlin exceeded expectations and was certainly one of the dominant drivers of the year, as he, Larson, and Byron were the only 3 drivers to lead 1,000 laps, I feel he also had more races where he did nothing than the other two, even if his best races were better. When you look at full season points this year, Hamlin only ranks 6th, 95 points behind Larson, and 79 points behind Bell, while he only beat Briscoe by a mere 4 points. Admittedly, if NASCAR actually ran a full season championship, Hamlin certainly wouldn't have skipped the race at Mexico City, and he presumably wouldn't have had an experimental engine failure just as Briscoe did to prepare for the finale. So I suspect he would have been closer in reality if he had to compete that way. But overall, I think Hamlin, Bell, and Briscoe were all too close to each other compared to Larson and Byron's advantage over Chase Elliott, who my model still thinks is better than any of the JGR drivers. As a result, Hamlin only ranked 12th in my model this year, behind both CBs, and 6th in Ryan McCafferty's, who also had him behind Bell. Now, I think Hamlin was certainly still better than Briscoe and Bell for his on track passing and his dominance. Hamlin ranked a close second to Larson in lead shares with 3.86, just nosing out Blaney's 3.80. Fourth in CRL with 3.12, where he actually was nosed out by Briscoe's 3.18. He led all JGR drivers in races with the most lead shares, races with the most laps led, fastest laps, and fastest races, where he had 5 to Bell and Briscoe's 1. Bell was actually faster than Hamlin, with Hamlin's speed percentile of 70.98, only barely ahead of Briscoe's 69.99, but that's enough for me to take Hamlin over the other two, but not over Blaney, Byron, or Larson. Hamlin deserved to win the race at Phoenix, and he still certainly would be deserving of a championship for his entire career accomplishments. But like Mark Martin, I still think he has never been the best NASCAR driver in a season, and that is where I will um, cut it off. Do you have any questions or anything? That wore me out to think I was thinking about reading the entire list. And then what's going to hurt even more is that I'm going to lose this probably. Um, because it probably isn't being recorded anywhere. If I don't get a question by like 11:35 or 11:40 or something, then I'll get off. How's the audio, by the way? I barely heard it, although I think that I have a real microphone. It's better than anything I've recorded before in that regard. Okay, I've been an hour and 53 minutes. I guess I'll stop at 2 hours exactly. I think this might be a better turnout that I got for some of my YouTube, live streams, even though I had 6,000 subscribers on there, but they only care about typing, so that makes sense. Alright, this worked better than I thought it would. Someday I might wanna look at going into going into podcasting. I certainly listen to a lot of them. I just feel like I would need the right partner for that. And I would probably not want to appear on camera. More to the point, I probably would not want all the stuff my mom hoarded to appear on camera. I mean, I have gotten rid of a great deal of it in the last year. I mean, it doesn't look like it probably, but if you've seen some of my other typing videos, I got rid of a lot of the stuff mom had hoarded, and I'm hoping she's going to be allowed to come back in a month or two. There is somebody coming to construct a ramp. They're going to be doing some bidding to have somebody construct a ramp and do some roof repairs. I mean, better turnout than I thought it was gonna be. I mean, it's a Saturday night Valentine's Day, I get that. But I thought it was a fitting time to do this since it's the night before the Daytona 500. I just hope it automatically saves when I close it in a few minutes. I'll stay on the remaining 3.5 minutes until it's 2 hours. If there's anything you'd like me to do in a live stream at some point, let me know. I was coming off a bit of an illness this week. I caught another virus in the nursing home, my third in the last year, although I did recover from it in the past couple days for the most part. So that's why I didn't write any columns this week. I'm going to have more of the daily driver columns next week. And now I'm going to sign off. Thank you and good night.